I'm Matt Hanley. I am the Vice President of Finance for OSF Home Care, OSF Rehab, OSF On Call, which is our digital platform, and OSF Medical Group. And within the medical group, I have responsibility over physician compensation. I've been actually probably serving the sisters here for about 12 years in a multitude of roles, but recently within finance within the last 4. I think the major objective that we tried to solve with ProCARE was provider visibility, so giving the information to the provider on a real-time basis. We really struggled with giving them access to the data. We did it through a manual process, and so we're looking for a system that could automate that for us. Yeah, so the partnership is really great. I would say the biggest thing that we actually got out of them was the opportunity to kind of partner through the design side. And so we really didn't know what to expect when we looked to a platform to build out provider compensation. And so working with them, giving their expertise and understanding of how we really should design an automated compensation system was really the benefit that we had. Yeah, so what ProCARE has really allowed us to do was take the information on an automated basis. So take a lot of disparate data feeds that we had today that we historically did manually through a lot of, I would say, Excel spreadsheets. We've now automated that work effort, put it into a repository, and now really have a process to automate that on a monthly basis and then distribute that to the providers real time so they can see that information. So it's allowed us to not only do that from an automation standpoint, but it's allowed us to also build out the ability to provide graphical depiction of work RVUs, quality measures, everything as the such. And so that's really given us that opportunity to give that full spectrum of visibility to the provider. Yeah, so what I envision for us to grow and really leverage ProCARE in that journey is really the ability to start modeling out certain aspects of particular comp plans. So we're obviously always making small changes within our comp plans, but what we really like to do and leverage ProCARE is really on the ability to start looking at value-based programs and incentive programs to start modeling that out. What would that look like? And with the flexibility of the tool, there's an environment that we can go in and really model that offline of our current production environment and see what modifications we can make, model that out, take that to our executive leadership, and then say what is going to be the right methodology for us going forward. If we think about transparency into engaging our physicians, that's really why we looked for a platform, because historically we used manual processes and really didn't have a frequency of giving information to the providers on I would say a very frequent basis, mostly at the end of the year. And so what we were looking to do was build that ability to give trust to the physicians with access to data so that really physician compensation wasn't a black box. It was one thing that they could see the data, the drivers of the information, they could see then how that translates into their compensation. And then if they wanted to, they could actually go into the detail of those drivers, like a CPT code down to the work review perspective. And so that's really why we leveraged ProCARE, was to give us that ability to give information at real time to our provider. So then really that builds trust in the fact that compensation doesn't become a black box. So as we looked at the marketplace for physician compensation, it was really thinking about what was going to give us the ability to grow and adapt as we mature, especially as the evolution has happened probably in the last several years with physician compensation. You're starting to move away from the basic salaried model with physician comp and have definitely separate models of compensation dependent on provider specialty. And so we were looking for a platform that would give us that ability to scale. And as we looked at other vendors out there, they're pretty rigid. While they could adapt, it was requiring a different build, and so as we looked at ProCARE and their platform, it was really designed around the end user and how do you utilize that tool set to make changes real time as ultimately you're thinking about your organization growing. And so that was a natural fit for us. ProCARE is really going to help us from a provider engagement standpoint to really allow us to give us that visibility into what's driving their compensation. And I think that really starts at the core of the trust factor with our physicians. So giving them data, allow them to see that on a real-time basis. If they want to go deeper into what's driving their compensation, they can do that through ProCARE. And I really like the spectrum that ProCARE provides. It starts with a dashboard that is really user-friendly to give those physicians that really high-level review of what's their drivers of their compensation. And then you have a build out of a comp summary, which is ultimately the calculation of their comp. And then you have a comp summary detail, which really goes into every aspect of what's driving their compensation. So they really have a full spectrum of, if they want to look at it at a high level, they can do that. If they want to look at the very basic level of what patient's driving that particular CPT and work RVU, they can see that as well. So it really gives them that full spectrum. And that's really why we like the platform. ProCARE has really helped us align to our organizational needs, because what it does is it allows us that flexibility to model out ultimately potential proposes that we have within our comp plans. And so we're trying to evolve to instill that we have provider engagement as much as we possibly can as it surrounds physician compensation. So utilizing the tool sets, utilizing our ability to model out certain particular aspects of compensation allows us to align to what we're trying to do from an organizational standpoint. I would say another aspect within ProCARE that we knew would have the ability, but we really didn't harness the power of it until we got into the platform, was really looking at our fair market value review. So at the end of the year, from a physician compensation standpoint, ProCARE has built in tool sets that allows us to look at fair market value and what we're ultimately paying our physicians in comparison to percentiles and national benchmarks. And that has really expedited our review process and ultimately given our board of directors a comfort level that we're ultimately administering compensation in accordance to the direction. So I would definitely say that ProCARE understands the business of physician compensation. You think about how we went through our build process. I would say that we were a little naive to understanding what it would entail from a build perspective. And so they were really our guides to helping us think about how to build the platform, not only for today, but ultimately for the future. So they've really helped us think through, where we're going. ProCARE really allows us to have that flexibility in building out potentially for risk pools or other value-based contracts. From initial implementation to where we are today, ProCARE has been very flexible in allowing us to think about how we initially started the design of thinking about inputs from our API, our HR system, and our time and attendance system, and then allowing us to think about what are those data feeds? Are they going to be automatic or not? And now we've matured in the fact of 100% knowing what is going to be automatic and what's not going to be automatic. And ProCARE has allowed us to get that flexibility of changing real time with what those data feeds are actually going to provide for us. We actually started with the thought that we could really automate all of our inputs. We utilize UKG for our HR system. We utilize API for time and attendance. We use another database for our physician productivity data. And we had the grandiose idea that all of that would automatically fed into the system. Mid-course in development, we had to do a course correction because certain data points from those systems really didn't connect and align automatically. And so through the build process, through the conversations with ProCARE, we ultimately came to a resolution to ultimately how to do that. And so they've been very responsive to allowing us to mature as an organization and mature within our compensation structure as we've along the journey. So thinking about just the initial build and design has been very fluid throughout the process, and they've been very good to work with. And then thinking about future state, we've been ultimately working through of how do we design the system so that as changes come through, plan design, different plans, pools, as I said, from a risk standpoint, they've been thinking about that and planning ahead. And so really, from our standpoint, we've got end user support on our end that can make those small changes because they've already thought about the build perspective. So the answer is yes. They have told us that something wasn't possible, but it was actually a blessing in disguise because our initial ask was really how could we build out compensation summaries that would be real time for our physicians. And so our initial ask was for a static report that ultimately we could generate on a monthly basis. ProCARE came back and said, well, thinking about the future, thinking about how to use the platform for its fullest potential, you should really have a dynamic form so that you can plug and play your result types into this form. So if you change plan types or change plan designs, you're able to modify that form. And so we had one intention in mind, giving the direction to ProCARE. They came back and said, well, that's probably okay for today, but future state, it's probably not okay. I would say ProCARE has delivered what it's promised in the sales cycle and actually went above and beyond. As I mentioned earlier in some of the conversation, we talked about how we thought we were going to have most of our data feeds automated, and we had a course correct. Literally halfway through the build, we realized that that wasn't going to be possible. And so they worked with us to think about, well, okay, if it's not going to be automated, what's going to be the best process for us to ensure that we had the efficiency within the build cycle? So, I think another component of not only on the build side is the support and the fact that we've had a dedicated support from ProCARE from the beginning until we really have been fully automated through the process. So we've had a full, I would say, life cycle ultimately of support from initiation to ultimately fully automated. I spoke to the sales cycle and the support side, but and I alluded to the aspect that ProCARE is kind of pushing us to think a little differently. And I would just say how refreshing that is. I mentioned earlier about how we thought we had something in mind of what we wanted, and they came back and challenged us. And I really like that aspect where it's not just trying to deliver what the customer wants. It's really challenging us to say, okay, we can deliver what you want, but we can deliver something different, which is probably better. And we really like that dialogue and working relationship with them as they build out the platform. It's really challenging us to think differently in how we administer compensation here at OSF.